Welcome back, everybody. I'm Sean LaFlock. I'm here with Scotty Hagman. This is Conversations, Fitness, Wellness, and Longevity. Scotty, how's it coming along there?
It's going pretty good.
I think
Yeah,
we, I think we can do like a week by week comparison of how the place looks, and we
oh,
can, you know what I mean.
yeah.
You're a little more enclosed this week.
These walls were here. Yeah, I'm just
Yeah.
kind of by the entrance of the entrance hallway. They're
Uh-huh.
up dry or mudding and stuff upstairs right now. So
Nice.
it's not super noisy, but it is noisy. So
Okay, cool. So I think we pick up where we left off last week.
mhm.
Last week we talked about how these tests kind of expose different areas of fitness and how a qualifier such as myself would prepare now for a build over the next 12 to 13 weeks to competition for, I think, 3-day competition with between, I guess, 6 and 8 events over those 3 days. And we went over one of the workouts, which was a CP battery test of 7 minutes of squat clean thrusters and 165 pounds. So we kind of went over that a little bit. We didn't really touch on the first workout, but it's kind of like almost self-explanatory, and it also really doesn't. It's not going to be too indicative of what you might see at the actual competition. Much like doing, dumbbell snatches and burpee box jump overs in the open, that's not going to be necessarily something you're going to see in the CrossFit Games and even in the regionals. It's more of like we're going to do a 2K row for time, but make it mixed modal, essentially, right?
Yeah.
So that being said, how can we improve upon in 12 weeks, or what might be something that you would use as modalities and timing wise for those intervals, or if they are intervals, to improve, let's call it aerobic power under moderate load over a 12-week period, considering that you're going to be peaking toward a competition.
Yeah. So, and I think we may have touched a little on this last week as well. But idea of finding variants or repetition schemes of the movements that you are intending to improve that you can do in pieces that are aerobic, and then literally do aerobic intervals with them. So,
Yep.
and that can start as 3 minutes and build toward 5, 7, 9, that sort of thing. Though I sometimes find, especially when people tend to come out too hot, I don't like 3-minute intervals much because
Yep.
it just baits someone into overdoing it and training the wrong energy system.
Yep.
Um,
How could you tell if that was something that was not good for somebody?
For that, the pace would not be sustainable.
Okay.
So this is where monotonous training can have its payoffs in that it can be so accurate. So let's say you've chosen light hang power cleans and toes to bar and running, let's just say. Yep. And you've made yourself a circuit of these, maybe 200-meter runs and a certain number of hang power cleans and toes to bar.
Yep.
And you have a work period, let's say it's a 5-minute AMRAP.
Yep.
And then you're resting a predetermined period, 2 to 3 minutes probably, going again, and you're probably doing that several times. You should get basically the same score every round.
Got it.
If you killed that first round and then the next few are way back of that, not good. And then obviously subjective feel too. If you're gassed out of that first one and you've got that feeling already of, you've crossed the red line, well, then you've crossed the red line. It should be something you can breathe through at all times. And that's where, it's for a mindful athlete, it's really paying attention to finding sustainability within the work you're trying to do.
Yep.
And the more experienced you are at that sort of thing, then you can maybe rotate movements because you know how to pace and what an aerobic session should feel like. So now you don't have to do running, toes to bar, and hang power cleans each and every round. You can, change up the movements, between different work pieces.
Yeah, exactly, and it gives you more ability to touch on more variable movements in an aerobic power setting. But I definitely think that it's something that I have found over time that has so much more control over your session is just doing repeats of the same movements, because then you really have something more objective to kind of tell. Like, because we all know there's movements that we just knock out of the park, and then there's movements we just are on a struggle bus with. So by exerting more, does it actually create sustainability? I'm not 100% sure, but I think that's why also mastery of movement is important, because the more movements you master, the more that you can actually potentially put those into aerobic power settings or aerobic interval settings, and then you can train them as the sport would necessitate. So, back in the day, it's like, oh, I wanted to be able to do 30 muscle ups for time. Well, it's like, you're never going to see that testing scenario ever within the sport. So it's more going to be like 10 wall balls, 3 muscle ups, 5 deadlifts, 5 rounds for time. So it's like, you're not actually just doing 30 muscle ups. You're doing 30 muscle ups amongst other stuff. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, exactly.
So I definitely think that, the other component is, like, alongside your aerobic work, is don't just neglect everything else, is work on those components, whatever the limiters might be, whether it is technique, whether it's mobility, whether it's just, being able to cycle those.
Finding an efficient pattern to do the movement in.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I think we've talked about this before numerous times, the idea of, a squat is not a squat, or a deadlift is not a deadlift if you don't need to use maximal tension to get the load done.
Yeah.
And then you should not use maximal tension to get the load done. You should use only the appropriate tension, and therefore you're conserving energy significantly. So.
Yep. And I believe we touched on this last week, but I know it was part of one of the testers, which was gymnastics. I guess density would be the consideration. It was 4 rounds of 21 pull-ups, 15 handstand push-ups, and then 18 goblet squats. So not too much complexity. So you're looking at pull-ups and handstand push-ups, kipping, so not a ton of complexity. But what would be a strategy over a 12-week span to improve those components, knowing that tests actually wouldn't be too far off from that, given the information that we've had in the past of this competition?
Yeah, so you can kind of use the same idea of trying to make a large block of, just say, gymnastic movements more aerobic. A good example could be, a workout like, say, Angie, or starting like that, you have 100 pull-ups to do.
Yep.
Typical strategy is you're going to blast through one big set, leave some in the tank, of course, and you're going to get up there and your next set's going to be way smaller. And before you know it, you're doing 2s and 3s and whatnot, as opposed to finding an aerobic pacing through it, which might be, even though maybe you can do 40, 50 pull-ups straight out of the gate, maybe you only do 7, 8, 10, come off the bar, get a breath, shake out, get back on the bar. I'm talking just maybe a few seconds here, but you find a way to make a larger block of work aerobic and learn your paces. So then when you do need to take a strategy of going faster, you're going to be able to perform more of it in an aerobic manner. Okay.
So do you think that that is I know it's a limiter. Do you think that's the biggest limiter for gymnastics ability and gymnastics density, is creating an aerobic ability during that? Do you think there's neurological or even localized muscular component towards something like that?
Yeah, you're going to definitely have those as well. There's definitely a neurological piece. That's where the more experienced, the more skilled, it's going to be less for that individual. And then there's certainly a local muscular issue, which, that can be tackled a variety of ways. But, whether you're doing more traditional muscular endurance type work far out from the competition and then blending it into more of a tester scenarios, or you're just accumulating a large volume of work, kind of like what I mentioned a bit ago, where you're chipping through reps but trying to be as aerobic as you can.
Yep.
Because that's still going to give you a local muscular endurance effect. And the way that you're going to, the differential is that the blood to the muscles is going to be occluded when the set is continuing, which is actually, of course, the goal of muscular endurance work. But then trying to perform within that, by taking the small breaks, you're allowing a little bit of that occlusion to dissipate, getting more fuel, oxygen to the muscles, therefore sustaining more reps aerobically, if that were
It wasn't too long ago. It was about 3 or 4 years ago where we went. You had programmed for me where we were doing those 3 sets of progressively increasing reps of. It was 20 back squats with, I think I was using 185. Rest about 2 minutes. Then it started out on 20 pull-ups and it progressed all the way to like 35 pull-ups over a 6-week span, and then there was push-ups. And we did that twice a week. It was pull-ups, squats, and then we varied between ring dips and push-ups. And I've never been in more pain in my entire life after training sessions, like literally writhing on the floor because of so much localized blood pump and fatigue.
Yeah.
But it got me to 70 pull-ups. I know that.
Yeah. I've done a similar version. I had tried that before we gave it to you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. At least you went through it too.
I can commiserate the suffering.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, like, what would be the adaptation there? Like, what's going on with that? Is it we're trying to become aerobic? Is it just learning how to suffer and deal with localized blood pump? I had AJ do that one time with me. AJ Moore do it, and he went outside and threw up after the third set.
Yeah, he's a beast too, right? Yeah.
Yeah, he's an animal.
Yeah. It would be interesting to throw a moxie on, while someone went through some sort of those protocols.
Yeah.
Just having watched the things that I have seen, and those were not by any means that sort of an effort on the moxie. I think we're clearly a heavy occlusion in the muscle in those sorts of settings.
Yep.
Driving that oxygen saturation way down, and then train the body to replenish it better in theory.
Yep.
But this is relatively speculation.
Yep. And again,
greater.
Go ahead.
I was saying certainly fuel storage, glycogen storage, and some things that those types of sets will certainly do.
I suppose you don't necessarily have to know how all the physiology works. I think in general your strategy given this test is break it down into components, submaximal, volume.
Yep.
And then progressively add more and more volume and intensity, and then retest and see what happens.
Pretty much in a nutshell, yeah. You don't have to know all the nuts and bolts.
Exactly. But obviously, it's nice to know, at least in the ballpark, of am I going about this correctly? Like, I know, like in the past, people were like, well, if you want to get better at Angie, you got to get better at longer and longer sets of pull-ups. So that's what you want to work on. It's like, well, not really, because that's not how to actually do the workout properly.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? The guys these days who are doing like sets of 50 in a row or whatever, it doesn't matter. It's the guys who are able to continuously do Murph, chest to bar, strict handstand push-up Murph. They're just keep going with those small sets, and they can do it over and over and over again. So I guess that becomes the testing strategy. So you kind of have to train your training strategies in the same way so that you can actually go out and perform in that way as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you have to be able to, once you get in the mix with the unknown, which it's going to be unknown, do you still understand how to try to make it as aerobic as possible, at least through the majority of it?
Yep. The last one that that comes up, especially in this particular competition, Wodapalooza, is that there is usually a lactate test or a alactic test. So like a 400-meter sprint on a woodway or one of the salt bike ones. They'll do that, and then they'll do that into a workout, and it will be separate tests. Mm-hmm. So they had the guys in the elite last year. They did a max, or they did a quarter mile as fast as they could, and then they had them do a max snatch, and then they had to do like a muscle up workout or something like that. It was a cool test, and obviously, and it was really cool seeing these guys go after it on the woodways. But
that alone would be worth the price of admission.
But you know what? It's interesting. It's like, all right, how do you train that within something that you also have to do CP battery? You also got to do heavy aerobic work and gymnastics work. Like yesterday, I was thinking about that. I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to throw some 10-5-10 or 5-10-5s in my workout with some supersets of like upper body work, just so I get some
Yeah.
touches on it. But like, I'm like, damn, that's also a huge component that you really never test within the sport
Yeah.
of
5-10-5. You talking about the lateral shuttle drill? Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, because I'm like, you know what, I work with this stuff with my, my athletes of different sports, but so I know that that's more sports specific. But you have to be able to go. Like, you might get done with the 5-10-5, you're like, oh wow, that felt good, and you're dead last. You actually have to train to go fast. So it's very counter of what the rest of the training is, because you're like, all right, everything needs to be sustainable except for this test right here that has to be all out as hard as you can. You got to be able to do it under fatigue too.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, that's a tough one. I would tend to say my thoughts around any of those really short tests that are only going to be, roughly a minute or something,
yep,
is it's not knowing specifically what it would be.
yeah,
You don't know if you're going to be on an assault bike, rower, running, other things maybe too. It's difficult to train for just because you train it on the assault bike doesn't mean that it carries over at all to
yep,
your 400.
yep,
And then really good performance on those is it's pretty genetically programmed. I mean, somebody's going to kill it, and they're going to
yeah,
kill it even if they don't train it.
mm-hmm,
And I think the you want to do well, but all your mixed train should give you a pretty good potential at it.
yep,
Everything that you're already doing, and then the person with the best aerobic ability is going to have the best chance at doing good at the stuff that follows.
yeah,
That person who's super gifted in that glycolytic pathway and can really produce a ton of power for 30 seconds is going to be in pain, and they're not going to do so well at those other two things, even though
yep.
they might have won the first one.
Yeah, it's a good point. It's almost like is the juice worth the squeeze on something like that? Do you really want to train on all that months, or do you just say, all right, this is pretty much as good as I'm going to get. I can refine my technique based on it. Like, I could go for some, I could do tempo training on some runs just to make sure my running technique is good and I got some exposure to it at least. But I'm not going to be going to the track and running 200-meter sprints because I think that there might be a vent.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or you know what I mean?
Yeah, I just wouldn't think it would be worth the trouble, unless you had someone you knew that was you'd been a 400-meter runner in college or something, and you're going to get some touches in case that comes up, so you can just mash it.
Yeah, exactly.
Outside of that, I just wouldn't.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, so I think that's just something I was thinking of, but we have a couple more tests that we can talk about and just think about how to train, but I don't want to get too far out from the latest in the fitness world of pretty much a bombshell when it comes to the sport thus far in its infancy. So we've been at CrossFit for 10 years, CrossFit Games, and you've been there since the inception of the CrossFit Games, right, Scott? Mm-hmm. Have you seen anybody on the podium get tested positive for performance-enhancing drugs in your 10 years of experience?
I don't recall it now.
Well, this is the year. Ricky Garard, who placed third out of Australia, his brother is actually Ben Garard, who was a CrossFit Games competitor as well. He, along with other CrossFit athletes, most of them masters athletes, and there were also one person out of the Atlantic region in was Ryan Elrod was popped for steroid use, or this is actually SARMs, an estrogen blocker after regionals, so he wasn't allowed to go to the games. But Ricky Garard, it says here, 23-year-old from Australia. He's been tested positive for a banned substance. He gets a 4-year ban. He was tested positive for testosterone, a beta-2 agonist known as and a beta-2 agonist known as Endurobol. Anabolic agents and beta-2 agonists are specifically named as banned classes of drugs in the CrossFit Games rulebook. CrossFit incorporates its drug testing program, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's that first. We obviously then we look at what he says happened, and he says that he was on this stuff during regionals, got tested at regionals, and was fine, made it to the games. And then he said they did different testing at the games, and they found that his sample was tested positive for these SARMs, as they're known as, which are basically estrogen blockers. So now that you kind of know what's going on, A, are you surprised that this happened? And B, what do you think of as the response from CrossFit of a ban of 4 years and essentially saying that this guy is a lone wolf?
Mm. Well, I would tend to think he's probably not a lone wolf. We've seen pretty much every other sport out there as it gets more mature and there's more money or sponsorship opportunity, we start seeing this come into play, right? I mean, pretty much name it, and CrossFit, this should be just a sign of the growing pains, right? We're at the point where now we have to think, or at least suspect, that some of our top people might well be a bit enhanced. And given the extremely demanding nature compared to most other sports of this one, I certainly wouldn't see any reason why that wouldn't be the case.
Yep. So this is the first time a podium athlete is actually tested positive. Now, the testing right now, I believe they do out-of-season testing with notification of 24 hours. I believe the testing organization is Drug Free Sport that CrossFit uses. They do not use USADA. USADA is they consider it the gold standard for drug testing. This is what USAW uses. This is what the Olympic training or the IOC or the U.S. Olympic training uses is USADA. They can show up anywhere, anytime, and test you. You have to have whereabouts. So you have to, if you're not there when you're supposed to be there, you are. They consider it a positive test. I think that is eventually where CrossFit's going to have to go, because the legitimacy of the sport is hinging on the testing policies. And if you have a third place athlete, and he's saying right now is that I just did this to keep up with everybody else who was doing this. For one, he failed the test. That's it. All right, you got to deal with what it is. But if he's saying that other people are doing this, the testing is not working. So the movie Icarus, that we had talked about, it's a Netflix movie about how Lance Armstrong, who's the original theory thought behind it, was Lance Armstrong got tested 500 times by by USADA, right, to try and catch him, because everybody knew he was on steroids. Everybody thought he was on steroids.
Yeah.
To this day, he's never tested hot. What does that say more about the fact that Lance is a cunning, mastermind when it comes to, using performance-enhancing drugs? A bit, but the tests aren't done. They're not testing it right.
Yeah, I mean, that's the big thing. And, I've been chatting with folks about this forever, it's just that there's so many strategies and new things being developed, and the testing has to know what they are. There isn't just a blanket test, obviously, that can detect. You have to know what you're testing for. When you have potentially thousands of agents, or metabolites or things, with one, it's cost prohibitive to test for 1,000 things, and so just because you're clean on a test, in my opinion, doesn't by any means mean you actually are still, in my mind,
Yep.
Unfortunately. And they sometimes save the samples, and then when they learn other things, we've seen that happen, right, where people get popped a while after the fact, because now they know, back in, 2013, everyone was using this substance, and now we know that, and we go back and look at the 2013 samples, and hey, check this out.
Yep.
But it's going to be, it's going to be very, very, very hard to make a sport clean, even if you have the gold standard of doping. It's just kind of the reality, unfortunately.
Yep.
But I think it's interesting, that he didn't try and deny it or say, it was in a dietary supplement, like, he basically
Owned up to it. I
owned up
respect
to
that.
it.
I
And just,
respect that.
yeah.
And again, I in some ways, like Lance Armstrong in my mind wouldn't have been a so vilified if he hadn't gone after people.
Oh yeah.
You
I think
know,
that's the
I think
yeah.
that's why he became a monster. So just think about it this way: you have somebody like who's incredibly ambitious. Just imagine this being, Steve Jobs, right?
Mhm.
He's manipulating the system as much as he can. He's using lawyers. He's going after people. It's libel. It's tarnishing people's reputations because he wants his company to make it to the top. Lance Armstrong's company is Lance Armstrong. He
Mhm.
wants nobody saying bad things about him. He's going to go after you if you do, and he's going to try to keep his record completely clean. Can you blame a guy who is ambitious for doing that and trying to maximize his profit, his ability to become as successful as possible? I think that in some ways it is very ambitious. Obviously, now we talk about morals and where you land in terms of like what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. I think once people like found out that A, he was doping, but B, he was going after people and trying to destroy their livelihoods to prove that he was not using, that changes things because that says a
Yeah.
lot more about who the individual is, and it's now the ends aren't justifying the means anymore. So I do believe that there are more people who are using, and I think they just did it smarter. I think that Ricky, whoever was advising him, or maybe he was just flying too close to the sun like Icarus. He's maybe trying to use PEDs during the games to try and get an unfair advantage while performing at the games.
Mhm.
That's obviously unacceptable, but I think in general, you can't be using that at any point during the year if
Yeah.
you're trying to make this a legitimate sport. So the out of season testing has to be ramped up. They're doing an okay job during competition because they test all the top 10 competitors, et cetera, so that just in case. But if they don't ramp up out of season competition, it's going to be very hard to keep the sport clean.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, I gotta wrap here. It's
Yep. That's
clients in the
probably
door.
a good time to wrap, Scotty. I'm
Yeah.
Sean. You can get me at Sean LaFlock at CrossFit DelRayBeach.com.
I'm Scott. You can get me at Scott at CrossFitPortland.com.
Awesome, Scotty. I'll talk to you next week, buddy.
All right. Take care, Red.
Take care.